How's it going, everyone? Landon with Late Model Restoration. Manual steering racks into Fox Mustangs have been a popular conversion amongst drag racing enthusiasts for a very long time. Today, I'm going to show you how to install a manual steering rack into a Fox Mustang thanks to this high quality offering from Unisteer. Each Unisteer steering rack kit features a natural aluminum finish and a chrome center tube. The rack itself is outfitted with new boots, bushings, and inner tie rods. This particular kit includes new outer tie rods to ensure a crisp and responsive steering system. To complete the conversion, a new steering shaft with U-style joints is included to eliminate any steering slop from the factory rack joint. This steering rack is also available by itself without the outer tie rods and steering shaft. I'm going to be installing this kit into a 1988 Fox Mustang. Regular viewers of the LMR YouTube channel probably recognize this car. This is the black coupe that I converted from an AOD to T5. A few more things before I begin the install. Instead of using the provided bushings, I opted for urethane rack bushings, which are currently available for 79 to 84 and 85 to 93 Mustangs. Also, I am going to be removing the power steering pump, and in its place, I'm going to be installing SVE's power steering pump delete kit. Their kit is going to include the two needed spacers and the appropriate length belt to properly space the AC compressor bracket in relation to the rest of the accessory drive components. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road. To begin the install, support the car via a lift or jack stands. Disconnect the negative battery cable. Make sure the key is in the on position so you're able to turn the wheel. Release tension on the tensioner and then remove the serpentine drive belt. Remove both front wheels. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove the cotter pin from the outer tie rod. Use a 19mm deep socket to remove the outer tie rod through spindle retaining nut. Strike the side of the spindle with a dead blow until the outer tie rod is removed from the spindle. Repeat these steps for the other side. To remove the steering rack retaining hardware, use an 18mm deep socket on the nut and a 15mm socket on the bolt head. Remove the nuts and then slide the bolts all the way back. These do not have to be fully removed. Leave the steering rack in place. Remove or cut the two power steering hoses that run in between the steering rack and the cooler. You can either cap the cooler lines or you can completely remove it. Let the fluid drain from the system into a bucket. To speed up the draining process, turn the wheel from lock to push the fluid out of the system. Remove the rag joint retaining hardware with a 9/16 socket and a 9/16 opened-end wrench. Remove the steering shaft to column retaining hardware by using a 5/8 socket on the bolt and an 11/16 box-end wrench on the nut. Pry the steering rack forward with a pry bar. Disconnect the high and low pressure lines with a crescent or a line wrench. Position these out of the way and then remove the steering rack from the car. Remove the two 11mm bolts securing the fan shroud to the radiator. Now, remove the four 7/16 bolts securing the fan assembly to the water pump. Remove both the shroud and fan from the car. Remove the four nuts and four bolts securing the AC compressor bracket. Remove the bracket from the car and set it aside. Remove the power steering pump by simply lowering it down and out of the engine bay. Position the longer SVE spacer over the power steering pump stud. Reinstall the AC compressor bracket. The shorter SVE spacer will be installed on the bottom corner of the bracket. The longer bolt you removed previously will secure this spacer. Loosely thread all of the previously removed nuts and bolts. Fully tighten the nuts and bolts that secure the AC compressor bracket. Place the manual steering rack on a workbench. Take one of the universal joints and place it over the pinion input shaft. Turn the rack in either direction until it fully locks. Line up one of the pinch bolt grooves with the center point on the pinion shaft. Rotate the joint in the opposite direction and count the number of turns it takes to fully lock. Divide that number by 2 and then count the number of turns it takes to center the rack. Install the universal joint that has the rectangular insert onto the pinion shaft. This portion of the universal joint will connect to the provided double D shaft. Loosen and remove the bolt from the universal joint. Position the joint over the splined end on the input shaft. Make sure the bolt hole is aligned with the notch groove on the shaft. Reinstall the bolt and fully tighten it down. Remove the bolt from the top of the universal joint. Position the double D shaft into the joint and align the notch groove with the bolt hole. Rethread the bolt and tighten it down. Take the other universal joint and remove one of the bolts. Position it over the double D shaft with the pinch bolt groove at a 90-degree rotation in relation to the lower universal joint pinch bolt groove. This must be done to cause a joint misalignment and to prevent binding of the joint. Align the bolt hole with the notch groove and then tighten it down. Now, position the steering column adapter into the universal joint. Remove the bolt, align the notch with the bolt hole, and then retighten the bolt. Since I'm using urethane bushings, proper lubrication is required. Be sure and lubricate your bushings with the appropriate grease. Install the bushings into the new rack. Position the steering rack over the K-member dowels and route the steering shaft in the correct orientation. Lightly tap the rack with a dead blow to get it started on the dowels. In my case, I found it easier to remove the column adapter from the universal joint and slide it into the column first. Align the holes and reinstall the previously removed hardware. Slide the universal joint back onto the steering column adapter and retighten the bolt. Fully seat the steering rack on the K-member. Retighten the nuts and torque to 35 pound-feet. On the old rack, measure the distance of the outer tie rods. This will help get your new rack within close alignment specifications to that of the old rack. Thread on the outer tie rod and count the number of turns. Do the same for the other tie rod. Run up the jam nuts and then measure the length. Adjust each tie rod accordingly to mimic the overall distance. Tighten the jam nuts. Position the tapered stud on the outer tie rod into the spindle. Tighten the provided nut and torque to 23 to 32 pound-feet. Install the two provided Zerk fittings into the outer tie rods. Reinstall your wheels and get the car on the ground. Reposition the fan and fan shroud back into the car. Retighten the two fan shroud to radiator bolts and the 4 fan clutch to water pump bolts. Install the shorter serpentine drive belt from the SVE Delete kit. Reconnect the negative battery cable and you're all finished. From start to finish here, guys, you're probably looking anywhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 hours. This Unisteer manual steering rack can be installed off of jack stands in the comfort of your own garage using basic hand tools. To see more videos like this one covering the Fox Body Mustang, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. This Unisteer manual steering rack kit and SVE's power steering pump delete kit is currently available from the Real Fox Enthusiasts, LMR.com.